Domination. A subtitle would be China's Belt and Road Initiative is reshaping trade and buying influence in Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas. So we've got four wonderful panelists I would like to introduce in a moment. Let's see, I will do some house cleaning with questions. This session we'll be using the app for questions and the note card system. So if the producers are out there, raise your hands. These guys, put their hands up. We'll have note cards for your questions. And the app that will bring questions in on the app I have right here, and I will be asking those questions. Each panelist will speak for 5 to 10 minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going in order to my left. 1, 2, 3, 4. Straight down the road. Boy, girl, boy, girl. And after every speaker speaks for a little bit, we'll talk about a few things amongst the crowd, amongst the speakers, and then I will entertain questions from the crowd. So my name is Tom Gailey, and I am a CU alumni, and I grew up in Boulder. I lived out in Asia for a couple of years, for a decade and a half, and teach at Front Range Community College, International Business, and I have some students here, so put your hands up, yeah. Yay, students. So I would like to introduce my first speaker, our first speaker, and it's Peter Rupert Light. Peter is a great friend because I've had the pleasure of working with introducing him a few times. I just picked up his book, which is for sale, by the way. At Mackey Auditorium, by the way, there are speaker books for sale over there that are quite good. And I went over there and visited, and I picked up his, and I would recommend that visit. Peter has been working with China in a diplomatic function for 30, 40 years and is on the current board of Council of International Exchange. He has worked in international banking and international teaching, speaks fluent Mandarin, and has written a couple of books, Pieces of China, again, those are over there, Host of Memories, Tales of Inevitable Happenstance, which I bought. The one thing I think that's really cool about Peter is he's running a foundation right now, putting a lot of money to this charity, which is One Sky Foundation, which, correct me if I'm wrong, this takes care of children that have not yet been adopted in Asia and China, and he's opened new offices in Vietnam and the region. Maybe he'll talk a little bit about that. Next speaker will be Lisa Fries, who is a MIT scientist involved in environmental chemistry. So put science, chemistry, environmental, and China all together and mix it up, and there's her expertise. So I think it's going to be very interesting with this panel. She's researched air pollution, health and economics in China and in the US and in developing nations. And her work with the Wilson's China Environment Forum in Washington, D.C. has helped underdeveloped nations. Next we have next is Ross Wilson, Ambassador Ross Wilson. We can call him that because he is an ambassador. He's a former ambassador to Turkey and Azerbaijan and has worked in embassies in Moscow and Prague through the 30-year foreign service career. Gosh, so many interesting things, all these speakers. He's worked with Turkey on regional energy issues. He's worked with the Atlantic Council of Eurasia Center. Let's see, he's chair of several nonprofit boards and has a wealth of experience on this subject. And last speaking will be Morgan Key. Morgan Kay. I butchered her name and I promised I wouldn't. It's Morgan Kay. And I just saw a panel with 3 out of the 4 of these panelists talking about hegemony and leadership and world domination, which was really interesting. We'll probably get into a little bit of that. But Morgan has worked with Motive International in conflict and enhancing stability in fragile societies around the world. And I talked with Morgan for 5 minutes and realized that we both have a very, very good friend who I go back 30 years beer drinking with. Our friend John Heater back in Washington, D.C. We know each other. We both know him and his family quite well. So that's really kind of a cute, small world. So I would like to start off with Peter, give us a little story, and we'll go down the row, and then a little discussion between, and then I'll take questions. Thank you very much.
I remember hearing about a Finnish prime minister who would invite politicians into a sauna. He wouldn't let them out till they all agreed. So we're going to leave here being friends. Although I worked in banking for many years and lived many years in China, it was to the classics that I am dedicated. And it's funny, this topic makes me think of very traditional matters Chinese. I used to do Tai Chi, the exercise, when I lived in Beijing long ago. I went every morning to do it. And I learned that very often it was about withdrawal and retreat from onslaught rather than aggression. I think that was reinforced in The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And this leads me to the topic of this panel. There's something so ominous about the title of this session. It really, I find it daunting and deeply inappropriate. I have to say, without lifting a finger, the world has made way for China, and nature hates a void. The US refused membership in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank under President Obama. And President Obama also discouraged our allies from joining that bank. I think we really sort of made a dreadful mistake by doing this. We could have had tremendous involvement in that part of the world in a very different way. The current administration withdrew from TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I think was a grave error. The world was also watching when our government violated its own red line when chemical weapons were used in Syria. The world was watching. The world was also watching when we gave a date certain for our withdrawal from Iraq. And I think the Chinese, all they had to do was watch. And I think, can't blame anybody for watching. I think we also are in a current trade war with China. And for those who've heard my joke, the first session, tough, because basically we're in a trade war now over televisions. We're not really going after the big problem of the theft of intellectual property, but it's about a balance of payments nonsense. If we're a rich country and we can afford to buy a lot of stuff, why wouldn't we? Okay. I think the Chinese are now watching us destroy NATO. They're watching the EU unravel. The Chinese now have beachheads by invitation in Trieste and Piraeus. And not a bullet is fired. And I think China also only has 2 aircraft carriers. So I'm not too concerned about China taking over the world. I'm concerned about the world handing itself to China. Which is, I'd say that sounds like Tai Chi and Sun Tzu. I find it really a fascinating predicament for them. In terms of the Silk Road, it's very interesting because the Silk Road existed long ago. And many of you who go to China and go on these posh tours of the Silk Road, you know, it's exotic, it's interesting, but it also represented very important trade routes all over Asia, all the way almost to Europe. And now this is being duplicated in much more substantial nature and also in maritime ways. And it's also, Chinese are finding themselves all over the world. No one's stopping them. Why shouldn't they do it? It's our bad for being complacent, and yet, and I say this with 2 Chinese daughters, what's lurking under a lot of this chit-chat about China is the old notion of the yellow peril. I think it's truly and deeply racist. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to come at things from a little bit of a different angle. As was explained, I mostly do work on air pollution and energy work within China and the US, and kind of the development between those two and how that's working, especially given the fact that these are the two largest emitters. It's a really interesting topic and always exciting to be working on that. So when you look at the Belt and Road initiative within China, there's a lot of energy investment going on. And I think that is one of the most critical elements, especially when we're looking at the future of climate change and the future of renewable energy, that the Belt and Road Initiative could be a huge contender and a huge push for movement towards renewable energy, especially within Southeast Asia, Latin America, where these countries are seeing, in Southeast Asia, we're seeing about, up until 2040, 67% growth rate in electricity needs, which is hugely, like a dramatic increase in electricity needs. And so you're seeing China invest in these countries and put a lot of money and infrastructure into these areas, and unfortunately, it is not into renewables. It is going into the typical coal plants and then hydro. About 80% of China's state-owned enterprises are investing, or 80% of investments from state-owned enterprises are in coal power within Southeast Asia. 17% are in hydro, 3% are in solar or wind power, which is hugely a huge problem in itself. Then on top of that, you see within that 80% coal, you're looking at about 60% of that coal is not using the most up-to-date technology. It's using like very old technology, not using adequate scrubbers or the highest efficiency coal power plants. So it's really exporting a lot of pollution to these other countries, and actually also to the western portion of China. I had the opportunity to work in Beijing for an energy and environmental research organization, and then spent a little time out west in China, and we were just chatting earlier about this really interesting example that I think kind of plays this into light. I was in Dunhuang, which was a critical element of the old Silk Road. It was kind of the area that you would come to once you crossed the desert and you had finally reached a town and civilization. And so out in Dunhuang, there's a lot of research going on the science and especially desertification end of things. But the main reason that all of this research is going on is because China's developing railways and a lot of like transport lines for their electricity out through this area, and they're trying to make sure that they're able to get electricity and get these railroads across the country through Western China to other areas. And so you're seeing so much increased investment and so much growth in these regions. And I think overall, it's really interesting to then also tie in the global reach past just Southeast Asia. This morning I was talking on a panel about the Arctic and the geopolitical risks we are seeing there. China last year put out a white paper on their polar Silk Road. So they're extending the Silk Road beyond just local regions. As you were saying, it's very maritime. It's really globally expanding. It's a spider web. It's reaching into the Arctic. And it has serious implications for not only the way that China is seen globally, but also for the future of energy and air pollution and emissions and climate change. Because as we see these countries develop, and if they get locked into old technologies, we're looking at least 30 years of using the oldest coal power plant technology, rather than using renewable sources. There's been a lot of work looking at the potential, if China was to invest, they estimate around $500 billion which sounds like a lot, but then you look at how much they're investing in the whole entire Belt and Road, which is multiple trillions of dollars. If 500 billion of that was in renewable energy within Southeast Asia, 31 countries would meet their Paris climate treaty goals for renewable energy. So it's pretty significant, and it has a huge impact on the future of climate and the future of energy around the world.